This is a summary of Pathwork Lecture 62, which is entitled Man and Woman. I picked this lecture for March 2020 before everybody realized the pandemic and what that would cause. So I found myself in the middle of a lecture that didn't feel relevant for what we were facing, all of us were facing. And all the lectures are useful at any point in time. You just have to figure out how to make the best use of it. So I'm going to do this small summary, realizing that that wasn't people's primary concerns, at least during this time period. I'm also using a virtual background for fun because after being self-isolated for 9 to 10 weeks, I'm looking for a little liveliness in the most mundane of activities. So Man and Woman, Pathwork Lecture 62. I divide this into 4 sections, I normally do, so that I can hit 4 basic aspects of the lecture. Sometimes there's 10 aspects. Every once in a while I'll go into a part 1 and part 2 if a lecture is particularly rich and deep and I feel that it's appropriate for its time. But this time I just kept it to 4. And the first week was the duality of man and woman on the earth plane. The second one, the mass images that we all hold about men, man, and women, woman. The third was about misunderstanding the message of spirit, and the fourth was creating union. So duality of man and woman on the earth plane. I picked this lecture because it came up in the online meetings, the differences between men and women, but more importantly, the difference of the energy that we call feminine or female, and the energy that we call male or masculine. There are 4 or 5 different lectures on this particular topic. But to summarize it, man and woman are the result of inhabiting an energy that is predominantly one way or the other. Or, for all I know, you are one way and you needed a different background, like my virtual background, so that you wouldn't go too far in one direction. So spirituality for me is a bunch of paradoxes because you don't know where you came from or why you're here. You don't know exactly what you're doing. Are you in part 10 of a 50-part saga? Are you at the end of your journey on a particular topic? Are you at the end of your journey on your whole earth experience? Or are you at the beginning of your journey? You cannot know from the human perspective. All you can do is look at what you are. Guide often advises to look at where were you born? What was your culture? What was your language? What is your gender? It's not that you're supposed to shoehorn in to what we'll discuss later, mass images. The reality is there's already a mass image. And by being born in a specific gender, you're going to be pushed that way, even if you don't lean that way. So if you're being pushed that way and you lean that way, then you're happy, everything fits. But as we see today in the world, a lot of people don't fit their birth gender. And it upends a lot of societal norms for this to happen. In the previous lecture, Pathwork Lecture 68, I spoke about how humanity has a history, and we've come from a certain dynamic. And it is very difficult to hit a time period where we have to change that dynamic. Now, laugh with me. This is where it all fit together. I'm speaking in a time where we have upended all our social interactions. Going out to get a bag of flour, you risk death. This is not what we anticipated a few months ago. It's a radical change in outlook, and we're all working with this. We're trying to come to peace with this. I have not touched a family member who don't live in my neighborhood. I have not seen and been with a family member in almost 10 weeks. So I'm just describing a few things that perhaps you can use to understand the idea that just because you're born female or born male does not indicate where you are learning and what you're doing with these 2 energy systems. So what are the 2 energy systems? The male energy system is one of activation. Human words are limiting, so we have to be very careful when we use words to describe an energy. So if I say dog, all of you have your vision of what dog means, depending on where you grew up, what kind of pictures you had, what your personal experiences were. The word dog does not communicate something specific. But there is we can get there with the word dog. We can discuss some things using a generic word like dog. Consider the word activation in a similar way. Activation is a huge range of activities, ways to do it, whys to do it, hows to do it. But basically, something has to happen. Now, the feminine energy system is one of letting it happen. Now, it is described in various literatures and in the Pathwork Lectures with other words. I found this particular description particularly apt. I actually got it from Pathwork Lecture 169, which is the masculine and feminine principles in the creative process. So it was a more generous explanation rather than active-passive. So think of it in terms of something happens and then you let it happen, because if you don't let it happen, it doesn't happen. You cannot separate these two. You cannot only be in the masculine, and you cannot only be in the feminine. So there's a difference in how much time and effort and focus we put on the activation process versus the letting it happen process. And this is the division into masculine and feminine energy that then manifests as male and female. So in spirit, we have different, I could be made up of, I'm a recipe. I'm a recipe of different kinds of activation and different kinds of let it happen. And it's a unique recipe, unique to me, and so are you. When we come on the planet, we get lumped together. Once again, mass images. So this process of understanding is that the two make a whole. And that when two people get together and find joy in an intimate relationship, spiritually, this is more about a sense of completion. So in other words, my recipe works well under many circumstances, but not all. Your recipe works well on some circumstances, but not all. It's a beautiful dance when you can find a partner where you can touch all the bases, where you're able to expand both of your horizons, both of your landscapes, both of your activities and capacities and the joyousness of life by complementing each other. But of course, it's important to understand your energy system and important to look at theirs, because on the planet Earth, we're never going to have a perfect fit. There'll always be a little friction, little problem. But if you understand this in principle, you may understand why some women are very masculine, why some men are very feminine, not in the mass image way, but in the way they are approaching an issue. But their gender also indicates something else. So this is not a pop quiz 1, 2, 3, where you can figure all this stuff out. So there's a duality of men and women on the earth plane that is not a duality in spirit. In spirit, it just is. Hi, you're 75%. Wow, that's interesting. I'm 36%. He's 47%. We don't contest what we are. We make use of what we are, and then we try to find complementary interactions so that we're not limited. So then in week 2, we looked at the mass images of man and woman. When I talk about millennia, it's a kind of a history lesson. The guide's really good at that. I tend to look at the last 80 years. And the reason for that is I have personal experience being with my parents who were raised by my grandparents, where I can see that there were different ways to do things that were so unquestionable, so absolute, that it never occurred to them to make any changes or to look for other answers. In, I want to say this century, but now we're in the 2020s and doesn't work as well as it did in the 1998s. There have been a phenomenal number of global changes since the Great Depression and World War II. A lot of social structures were taken apart. They were dissolved. They weren't suitable, they couldn't catch up with the times, and they were replaced with other structures that may not have been as well proofed as they could have been. With all that change going on, there's a tendency for people to hold on to what worked, hold on to what they remembered. But what they remembered is in the past. So let me be very specific. When I was 12 and living in Southern California in 1960, my mother, who had been raised in a small town in the South, wanted me, when we went to religious services, to wear a hat and gloves, because that's what young ladies wore. Not in 1960 in Southern California. But that was the paradigm that she worked within. That is ladylike, that defines a well-bred young lady to wear these clothing, this kind of clothing. And so she was insistent, and it was the old trick of I would wear them and then take them off once I got to where I was going, because it was silly. Nobody wore gloves and a hat when you're 12 in Southern California in 1960. This is a very tiny example of mass images. And Pathwork is about bringing those out of our unconscious background. Once again, that references Pathwork Lecture 68 that I finished the month before. We want to bring these out of the background where they're controlling us without our knowing it, bring it forward so we can make conscious decisions about what we want to do today. We don't want to go around feeling uncomfortable because we're not doing what we think we ought to do. But if we examine that and we realize, I imagine I would be more comfortable in old-fashioned clothing. However, I don't want to wear them. And we made a conscious choice and we're aware that there would be a time period where we would feel slightly uncomfortable in the new clothing or the new arrangements. That it would be easier to transition from one phase to the other. But most of us are busy in life, and it's hard to find these things, bring them into conscious awareness and think about them. So mass images about man and woman. Because the cliches come from some facts, cliches reflect statistical norms. And so you can say men are like this and women are like that. People generally understand you're not talking about individuals. And yet we do tend to forget when we're speaking to individuals that those generalities cannot apply to a unique individual, even if they fall into that pattern. They're going to be individualistic in how they are in that pattern. So it is important to bring up the mass images that we have about men and women because we trap ourselves in that. I know that I carry a lot of masculine energy, and I was always either ashamed of it or wanting to be a boy. You can imagine how that may have played out in my life. I had to understand that I'm simply different from the women that I saw when I was young as role models. I did not see the person I am today. Those people were not in my social circles. So mass images about men and women need to be thought through. We need to look at our mass images, explore them, find our place with them. Where do we fit and where do we not fit our own images about who we should be? The third week we did misunderstanding the message of spirit. This section was about how we try to pretend that our conscious thoughts rule our lives. They do not. They may make the decisions, but they don't make us happy about it. And on the premise of, if you've ever dealt with water leaks, water will go where water goes. They will find a way. Water will find its way around anything. Unconscious thoughts will find their way how to manifest. So the idea is that we may misunderstand the message of spirit. We may misunderstand our thought process, think we are doing something creatively or positively, and not realize that there's a backlog, there's a pent-up dynamic of some negative thoughts that are going to interfere with that can interfere with our understanding our own thought process, misunderstanding what we're actually thinking. Because our wavelength is, I'm thinking good thoughts, therefore anything that comes to my brain now is good. May or may not be true. So that we misunderstand our own motives, and then when we act them out and we get feedback, it makes no sense. I thought I was positive, I got a negative reaction in return. And it turns into a blame game. Instead of quietly examining what was going on. What was I actually doing versus what I thought I was doing? The other aspects of this is that whenever there is friction between two people, we need to look for our part in it. So what I said about we complement each other, even the best possible relationship, there's going to be some friction no matter how well we complement. That is the reality of the planet. Imperfection is our reality. So that when friction comes up, it is the result of these kinds of background conflicts that we're not fully aware of. And the invitation, and this happens in practically every lecture, the invitation is to take a look at it. Stand back, take a look, see what's going on. The fourth week was about creating union, meaning that there is a goal here, and that is for us to all be the best we can be. But if we are not fully one way or the other, then we're going to be missing parts. And nobody's everything. No one represents all aspects of the masculine and feminine, of reason, will, and emotion, of perfect physical, the perfect mental, the perfect emotional. So that in creating union, there's a strong unconscious and true desire to find unity. But when that turns into a demand, when the other person must meet our demand of feeling that we're there, we've got it, and that we will have it for all time, we destroy the very unity that we are seeking. So in creating union, it is important to work with the friction that happens, to welcome it. It's a place of dissolving negativities on our side, and also in assisting other people to dissolve theirs by example. So in other words, if I don't take care of my issues, I cannot expect you to take care of yours. But if I take care of mine and I model doing that, then there is a chance that you will consider reciprocating. And if you don't, then you have to make a decision about the relationship that we're in. The guide quite clearly says that love is the key to eliminate this. That when we're reaching for unity, we're reaching for love. If you're reaching for love, then the question is, what is the loving thing to do in this moment? Not what's best for me. Love means all of us. The two people in the room, what is the loving thing to do here? What would bring more love into the situation? Now, whether they think this way or not, that's the problem. The idea is, what can you do? You cannot make someone show love. You cannot make someone explore themselves. None of this can be forced upon someone. But the idea that if you find the love and you seek the unitive and you do your very best, then there will be a tendency for you to attract someone who wants something similar. But something similar means there will always be a little bit of friction. And love is what can address this. And then the other generic pathwork teaching, which is why suddenly when I get into this, it was very valid for so many other topics, as I find all lectures are. Ego importance and preoccupation. are directly opposed to love. My desire to win, my desire to be seen well, is an obstacle to love. If real love is transparency, then I can't try to be something I'm not. So it is important that I accept where I am. And when we talk about that in terms of ego, accepting where you are does not mean staying there. It's a misunderstanding. It's a mass image about acceptance. Acceptance means you just get to stay there. Acceptance means you see it and you don't argue with it. This is where I am now. Where do I want to go and how do I want to get there? To me, if I take the banal examples of life, if you see a map and you're lost, the first thing you have to figure out is where you are. It won't help you if you have a map of a city if you don't know where you are. You may certainly be able to see what's going on in the city, but for you to participate, you have to know where you are on the map. That's acceptance. So ego importance and preoccupation are directly opposed to love. Accepting where you are will enable you to then reach forward and say, and where would I like to be? And how would I like to get there? And the last one was that relationship in the new age, that we still have some negative archetypes about relationship. Just it's a mass image. I remember the first time the word mother-in-law was applied to me, and I cringed. There are so many stereotypes about mother-in-law. It's simply a fact. That's my position in my family dynamic. I have a son-in-law, and I am his mother-in-law. But I remember the first time the term was used, I felt like I had a comedy label smacked on my forehead. It made me uncomfortable. I started worrying about, I don't want to be that kind of mother-in-law. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. It took a while to calm down about it because I am who I am. And this is a cooperative thing. So the other person has their idea of what the relationship should be or fears of what the relationship might be. Now, that's the last time, well, it's not the last time, it's one of the times I remember being very active about, oh my goodness, I have a label, I have to behave accordingly, I have to not do this. Becoming a grandmother was something similar. I was too young and foolish to worry about being a mother. Life was busy back then. But by the time the grandkid came along, and then the second grandkid, I had to think in terms of who am I as a grandmother? And I had to find my own reality in that role. I'm not like a lot of grandmothers. The truth is nobody's like a lot of grandmothers. This is an individual reality, and we fill it with our individual talents. So back to man and woman. We fill our roles as men and as women with our individual talents. And it is not a preclusion to be born one way or the other, to switch. What our relationships are do not define us. We define us. So at the end of this month, of the crazy month of March, I found that it wasn't a bad lecture at all, and we all had fun with it. Because the principles can be used in other places. So I hope you read the lecture, Pathwork Lectures 62, Man and Woman. I hope you stay healthy and safe, and blessings upon you and your loved ones during difficult times. Ta.